So let's get started. So the topic that we're going to discuss today is simplify compliance and security investigations with generative AI. Very important topic these days, and the way that we're going to go through it is following the next agenda. So we're going to get to meet Sandi. Sandi, she is a compliance security engineer. She faces several challenges with compliance and auditing on a daily basis. And she's going to start learning about these services on AWS that could eventually help her to achieve her goals. And then at the end of the session, we're going to have a small demo and some Q&A section. So as I told you, we're going to get to meet Sandi. For you to know, she's well-versed in security, compliance, and auditing needs in the cloud. Though she's new to the organization, she is starting to ramp up on AWS services. She is still learning on best practices for compliance on AWS, so she's getting there. She has average SQL skills. In the past, on her previous job, she has relied on power users for data analysis, right? So this is Sandi. On a daily basis, Sandi's life looked like this. So she needs to focus on AWS Audit reporting. She also is in charge of AWS resource compliance, so she needs to keep track of those and run security investigations on them, on the AWS environments. And time and time, she also focuses on AWS operational troubleshooting, if it is requested. So somebody on Sandi's organization today found out an S3 public bucket. So the first task that she gets is basically diving deep to understand the overall status of the organization compliance for Amazon S3 buckets. She needs to identify the S3 buckets that are not compliant. She needs to identify the users who take actions on those resources. And she needs to analyze all the steps that were taken to figure out if there is further investigation that needs to be done. So she knows, and somebody on the team told her, that AWS Config and AWS CloudTrail are enabled, right? So she says, OK, I need to learn a little bit more about AWS Config to start. So she learns that AWS Config is a service that allows her to assess, audit, and evaluate the environments, right? How it works is that basically it records all the resource and changes on the resources on a consistent format, right? It allows you to run AWS config rules that are managed or custom in order to evaluate the compliance of the resources that are deployed. Okay? It also allows her to remediate and run automations on those findings, right? If she found something that is not compliant, it allows her also to run automation and remediations on those resources. And finally, it allows her to aggregate data across all the regions and across all the organization. How it integrates with other, let's say, solutions is that, for example, through AWS Config APIs and the console, she is able to interact with them. She is able, for example, to generate SNS notifications in case a resource compliance changes. If there is a change on one of the S3 buckets, for example, she can notify through an SNS topic into a subscription. It also has CloudWatch metrics, right? So it allows her to track all those configuration items. That is basically every single change that a resource sees. It also keeps track on that on CloudWatch metrics. It can also aggregate that on Amazon S3 buckets. If you want to run further analysis on that, you can also do that. And finally, it also integrates those configuration items with the service that is CloudTrail Lake. Something that sometimes gets overlooked, and she realized, is that AWS Config is a foundational service for several other AWS services that help track compliance and security on AWS. Basically, how it works is that on every single region that you have workloads, it enables what is called a config recorder, right? So this helps keep track of those AWS environments per region basis. When you create those config recorder, you are asked, or you have the option to run continuous recording or periodic recording. That is basically tracking changes every 24 hours, but on daily basis. And these are the options that you can configure those recording. And on top of that, you can enable, as I told you, AWS config rules. You can have managed rules, that these are rules that are there as a template that you can select and work with those. And you can also create custom rules if you have like a very specific use case that you need to leverage. Those can be set to be triggered on changes. So if a resource sees a change, it gets evaluated again, or those can be periodic recording as well. And then, as I mentioned, AWS Config gives you the capability to enable a lot of other services. Like, for example, Security Hub, the security frameworks that we see in Security Hub are basically leveraging AWS config rules in the backend. So those are what we call Security Hub managed config rules. So you will see those in the console that are basically aggregating data and populating that into Security Hub that gives you a compliance score. Other services that leverage AWS Config is, for example, control tower guardrails. So all those detective controls that you see in your control tower environments are also leveraging AWS config rules. Conformance packs. This is really powerful because conformance packs is basically allowing you to bundle a set of AWS config rules that allows you to have an immutable set of controls on a specific accounts that cannot be changed. And it gives you like an overall idea of a set of controls that you're looking for. For example, you want to pursue a certain specific certification or compliance needs, you can leverage those conformance packs to achieve those. And of course, AWS Firewall Manager, this gives you the capability for you to centralize and manage all your AWS firewalls in a single delegated account, for example. And how that works in the backend is also leveraging AWS Config. So she keeps reading, and she finds out that there's also a new feature that was released on AWS on re:Invent last year that is basically AWS Config generative AI-powered natural language query. So this, what allows her is that now she can search and query the current configuration of the AWS resources using plain natural language, right? So remember that Sandi, she has average SQL skills, but she's still learning AWS. So she is not familiar with all the SQL statements and the parameters that she needs to leverage. So this will allow her to be more expedited on her investigations. You can use the queries as they are generated, and we're going to see in a few minutes. And it, of course, saves her time to simplify the investigations and to keep track of the configurations and run the investigations that she needs. Now, she says, OK, I think I got it. I need to go to AWS Config and see what I can see there. So she goes to the console. She clicks on AWS Config. She sees the dashboard and say, oh, my God, I have a lot of non-compliant resources. So I go to Advanced Queries, and I click to create a new query. Oh, we have this new feature. OK, let me ask to show me all the non-compliant S3 buckets. So she does that, and she hits the query. Of course, she doesn't know how to write a query. You're going to see that it gets populated on the right side of the console. She populates that to the editor, and she runs the query. She doesn't understand all the SQL statements, as I mentioned. She gets like a list of all the AWS resources, but there are a lot of rules there that are non-compliant. So she got told that she needs to find out all the public ones, at least to start the investigation, right? Because somebody found something that it was suspicious. So she asked to show me all the S3 public buckets. She generates the query. And how the query is going to get generated, you will see that this is way more complex, right? Still, she just populated to the editor. She runs it. Now she gets 2 S3 buckets. She knows that one is known. She understands that. But there's another one that she needs to look into further. So she decides to keep investigating.
Thank you. All right, so now that Sandi has figured out the resource that she's interested in, there's a resource of interest. Sandi is now very curious to know who are the users who have actually taken the action to make this S3 bucket public. And then she also wants to know, is it a mistake? Or is it something that she should investigate further? Is it a suspicious behavior that she should dive into? So she's all into her investigative mode, and she wants to dive deep into this data. And she knows that AWS CloudTrail is a service that provides her with audit logs that has information on who did what and when. So she knows after config, where does she need to go to? As we said, Sandi is fairly new. She's ramping up on AWS. So she does go in and does a quick review of what CloudTrail is. And she basically finds out that AWS CloudTrail is the service that will provide her all the audit logs in AWS environments. AWS CloudTrail tracks user and API activity across a customer's AWS environments and provides them information to figure out who did what and when. All of these logs gives them that information. What CloudTrail does is there are 4 key components of if somebody is using CloudTrail. They will first enable CloudTrail. They will say, these are the types of events I want to capture. These are the types of API activities I want to capture. And they'll let CloudTrail know that. And CloudTrail will start capturing all of this information and then send it to a destination that the customer has chosen. That could be an S3 bucket. From S3 bucket, that could be a CloudWatch logs. And then there's also CloudTrail Lake, which I'll get into deeper. So that's where they store it. One of the requirements that typically anyone dealing with audit logs is to store it in an immutable fashion. So make sure that when you're acting on this information, you are comfortable knowing that this data has not been changed. So there are multiple ways CloudTrail helps you. If you're using Trail, you can enable log file validation that will help you identify if the logs have been mutated. So that's where you go ahead and store it, make sure that it is immutable, make sure only the people who need to have access to it have access to it. Then typically customers, users dive deep into this data when they have questions to see what they're looking for, to identify if there's something suspicious, to build reports for auditing, to identify if there's an operational issue happening in your application, such as throttling, a Lambda loop running, and things like that. So they come to CloudTrail, dive deep into these logs, and then they identify what they need to act upon. Once they identify what they need to act upon, they probably will take an action, but then sometimes customers will build reports, send it over for auditing. Sometimes they'll build reports, send it over to managers, so they can continue to further take action on the findings. Sandi knows that in her organization, they're also using CloudTrail Lake. CloudTrail Lake is a capability of CloudTrail that makes the entire workflow of what we were looking a managed solution. It is a managed solution where you not only capture all of the audit logs, activity logs happening in AWS, it will immutably store and aggregate your logs from all regions, all accounts, if you're using an organization-wide CloudTrail Lake. You can also bring in activity logs from non-AWS sources if you want to consolidate everything in one place. You can visualize your data within CloudTrail Lake, and you can also dive deep into this data using SQL queries if that's what you're trying to do. So this one seems to be like a good place for Sandi to start. Even before the recent launch, there were multiple things that would make Sandi's life really easy if she's trying to dive deep into CloudTrail data. So one, as it is a managed solution, it is a turnkey solution. You turn it on, and then anytime you need to access that data, you can just come to CloudTrail console and start writing queries, start visualizing that data. So it's a turnkey solution. You don't have to spend any time on ETL. So if you're using something like CloudTrail Trails and sending it to your S3 bucket, that works perfectly. But if you have analysis needs on top of it, you would have to either build your own solution to dive deep into it or rely on other solutions to move the data from your S3 bucket to that solution. And then, as I said, it is a managed solution. It is immutable by design. Sandi or anyone in the organization can only read this data. This data is not editable by anyone in the organization. So immutability is in design. It's not just telling you if somebody has tampered your logs. It is not even allowing you to do that. Another key factor is even if somebody comes in and deletes your CloudTrail Lake or the construct that holds that data, CloudTrail keeps that for 7 more days, so you can come back and restore that data. So you have that immutability and availability of this data for longer period, even if somebody does something malicious. So now she knows this is a great place to start. Here she is on config. She has just found out S3 bucket was public. She does go in and make sure that that is not public anymore. She remediates that. But now she, as I said, wears her detective hat, and she wants to see what next, who did that. So from here, she will go to CloudTrail Lake. First, she'll see, OK, event data store, this is the construct that holds the data. She comes back and sees that there is an organization-wide event data store that is capturing all management and data events in her organization. Let it play and talk through it. By the time, hopefully, it'll reach the dashboard. So she goes to CloudTrail Lake dashboard. As I was mentioning in the previous slide, within CloudTrail Lake, you can also visualize your data. CloudTrail Lake dashboards are, this one, are like a curated set of widgets that are some of the common questions that somebody like Sandi will get. So she looks into it, and there was not much information. So finally, she has to write her own query. She comes to shared queries, and then she knows that she's looking for a bucket. She quickly searches if there is a query on a bucket. She finds one, and then she's like, OK, I'm going to start here, because she's not, remember, she's not well-versed with SQL, but she understands that she can write it. However, she's not well-versed with CloudTrail events. So now she switches to documentation and tries to see how CloudTrail events are structured. So she'll spend some time, 15, 20 minutes, looking for the different fields that CloudTrail event has, gets herself knowledgeable about it, and then come back to CloudTrail Lake. So depending on how quickly she reads, depends how long she takes over there. When she comes in, she starts with this query, and then she starts making edits to this query. And that's what I do. I know SQL enough that I'll start from somewhere, and then I can query it. So this is me trying to run that query, making some changes. I want to know event name. I want to know user identity. But then I make these changes. This looks good. And then I'll go ahead and run. So this is exactly Sandi's workflow. She takes a look, and then she finds out that the query fails. So it happens a lot. But she'll look at, OK, what are the reasons why it failed? She reads it, finds a missing comma, finds a missing syntax error, goes and fixes it, and then fails again. And then she'll go ahead and change it, try to. And she'll continue this, right? She'll continue to update this query. She'll continue to get to the point where it'll give an answer, well, it'll run. And that's when, this process can be longer, depending on how well-versed, as I said, you are with SQL, as well as the event structure itself. And you'll see that she'll finally be able to run a query that is successful, but this is not the results that she's looking for, because she knows that the action has taken place. She knows that there should be an information. So clearly, something is missing. So over here, she sees that there was actually 0 records found for the information that she was looking for. Now, so she's frustrated. She wants to go to power users, because that's her default workflow. But she's new to the organization. She doesn't know who it is. And even if she was not new, power users are busy. They don't have time for you to immediately come in and start writing new queries and then go from there. So now, Sandi is hoping that CloudTrail had something similar that Config had, because she went in over there, she wrote a question, and she was able to get the answer. So she's really hoping for an easy button instead of having to write, fine-tune these queries. And that's what we launched yesterday. So now with CloudTrail Lake, if you need to write a query, if you have to ask a question, if you need to dive deep into CloudTrail logs, similar to Config, you can just come to CloudTrail Lake and ask a question, and then we will generate a query for you that you can run. It's very similar to Config. And exactly the same way, it'll run a query. You can fine-tune it if you want. You can fine-tune the question, or you can continue to fine-tune the query itself that is provided to meet your needs. It's in preview. That's what we launched yesterday. It's in Northern Virginia region during the preview time. And as you play with it, we'd love to get your feedback as you go. But now let's move on to Sandi and how it has made her life simpler. So a couple of things we'll look at. So the first thing, as I said, her first question was, as soon as she found that there was an S3 bucket that was non-compliant, she wanted to see what all happened on that S3 bucket. Till the time that was public, who accessed that S3 bucket, what did they do? So she wants to see everything that happened on this bucket. So she'll come over here, and she will ask that question. She wants to know everything, all API actions that took place on the bucket, S3 bucket, with the name that she got from config, and then she will generate a query. And it generates a query for her. The demo is at the real speed, so that's how fast or it takes to run the query, to generate the query. And there you go. So she asked the question, the query was generated. She didn't have to know what were the fields. She didn't have to know what it was. So she goes in. She goes through very quickly through the results on all of the activities, and she finds something that she knows will make a bucket public. So she found this particular API action, and she wants to now dive deeper. So with config, she found the resource of interest. With this query, she found the action of interest. Now she wants to go dive deeper, and she wants the user of interest. So she takes this, and she goes back here, and then she wants to ask another question. So she'll click on another query, and she will basically ask the question. She wants to know which user took this action. So she just asks that questions and generate the query. Goes to the same thing. It doesn't have to write anything, doesn't have to change anything in this one, and then she runs it. All right. So here is the query result for it. This user, she finds the user and the entire user identity and that took that action yesterday that made this bucket public. Now she's gotten the actor of interest. Now she wants to know what else did this person do. Was it a mistake? Did this person do anything else that could be suspicious? Is it somebody that she needs to track, somebody that she needs to escalate to the security team to find out what's happening? So she wants to dig deeper. So she's found the actor of interest, and now she wants to go back and find all of the actions of interest to basically draw a map of whether this is a suspicious behavior or not, whether this is something to be concerned on. So the next thing she wants to do is she wants to see what all actions did this user do during a time period. So she goes back and she types that question over here, and she says, show me all API actions taken by this particular user identity in the last 24 hours. I put in the last 24 hours over here because the bucket was made public in the last 24 hours. But that's something up to Sandi. If the time period that she was looking for was longer, she would do that. So again, she puts that question in, and she gets the query. She goes back, she runs the query, and she sees that there is a lot of things that this particular user did. We'll see, I think there were around 3,000 records in just 24 hours. She goes to the query, and she sees that, she looks at the event name, and she sees that most of these objects looked like someone was reading something, someone was listing something, and things like that, not something that she's very interested in. So she comes back, and she says, show me this, like, write-only actions. Show me any actions where the resource was actually changed, an object was actually removed. So she comes in, and she says, exclude read events. And she just goes to that question, updates, exclude read events, and it gives the query. She runs it again, and then she'll get a smaller list. So she's getting diving deeper and deeper and like trying to figure out what happens. Now she does this, and she sees that she's been using a lot of CloudTrail Lake now. So there's a lot of CloudTrail Lake related stuff. Not important to her. She goes down, she goes back, and she's like, I want to exclude this event. So what she's trying to do is she's starting from like a huge set of data, but she knows things that she doesn't want. And that's a very common scenario. And then she continues to iterate her questions and goes deeper and deeper on the same question. And that's what she's doing over here. And she says, exclude everything that has event sources, CloudTrail Lake. It doesn't say event source. She says exclude CloudTrail. And then it gives a query, and she'll run it again. And there you go. She found a lot of things that is of interest to her. She cannot tell it is suspicious right now, but this user went in and created some instances, created a security role, created an access key, and if you've been in a situation where something malicious or suspicious is happening, these are some of the common things that a user would do. Create an access key, run a lot of instances, and things like that. So with this, I'm going to move, but with this, as you can see, Sandi was able to go from I know something, and then she was able to dive deep into every minute detail that was important for her to figure out if the situation was suspicious, if it required an action. In this case, she took the report, she gave it to the security team, and they are basically figuring out whether it was a mistake or this user needs to be looked into. So she was able to go through all of that. She would still be able to do, if this capability was not there, it would just take a longer time, or it will take reliance on a power user. So this feature has made all of that very easy. I did bring up the resources over here. These are 2 blogs as you try it out. These blogs would help you figure out, get started with AWS Config, natural language querying, and it'll get you started with CloudTrail natural language query as well. So that's what we had. As Rodolfo and I were making this presentation, we obviously booked these sessions long back. It was a 60-minute session, but there was no way we could spend 60 minutes when everything went so quickly. So that's what happens when you use natural language query generations. 1 hour gets back to 30 minutes, and you have your time back in your day. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.